If you ever needed a reminder as to what is possible with just white paper and black ink, in terms of telling compelling stories, creating worlds and characters, look no further than this book right here. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Thomas Pitilli. I'm a comic book artist and an illustrator. And in this video, we're going to be looking at Locus, the Maggie and Hopi stories. This is a collection of Jaime Hernandez's incredible work, and it collects over 15 years worth of his ongoing comic series. And if you could see how thick this book is, believe it or not, this is just scratching the surface of all the work that he has put into that series over the years. As I'm posting this video, this book is not yet available for sale, but Fantagraphics was kind enough to send me an advanced copy, and it's been an amazing experience to look through this incredible body of work from one of my favorite comic artists, cartoonists, illustrators. He's just one of my favorite artists in general. And I'm super psyched to be able to share what is inside of this book with you. This year, 2026, Fantagraphics is celebrating their 50th anniversary. That's pretty crazy. Fantagraphics is responsible for so many alternative comic works over the years by some incredible creators. And it has been the home of Jaime Hernandez's stories and the Hernandez brothers' stories for over 40 years at this point. So as part of their celebration of this 50th anniversary, this is a pretty amazing feather in their cap, just to be able to collect what is only a fraction of all the stories that Jaime Hernandez has created over so many decades. This book, though, collects the first 15 years of the Maggie and Hopi stories from the famous Love and Rockets series. Love and Rockets is a series that was started by Jaime Hernandez and his brother Gilbert, and Love and Rockets is still going on today. I have long been a fan of Jaime Hernandez's work. He's by far one of my favorite cartoonists and certainly a very big influence on my work. I was first introduced to his work, I think, before I even knew who Alex Toth was. And then it wasn't until I sort of understood a little bit more of the context of Jaime Hernandez's influences, such as Toth and Harry Lucy and Dennis the Menace comics. It wasn't until then that I appreciated his work even more, because of course he has gone on to become an influence on generations of artists since he's hit the scene with his Love and Rockets comics. More than anything for me, this book is really like an insight into the progression and evolution of an artist. To be able to start at his most early Love and Rockets comic work, really, as I understand it, this was right when he started making comics. To see an artist who becomes a full-fledged master of the craft, to be able to see his most earliest comic work and flip through the hundreds and hundreds of pages that are in here and watch his evolution and progression as an artist is amazing. And it's really inspiring for me, because for so many of the artists that I admire and am inspired by, I always like to look back at their most earliest work. And there's a really interesting thing that happens when you're able to look at an artist's work that you really like and see the little glimpses and seeds of what is to come eventually with their work. You can see already how the style is different than where it is today, for instance, or perhaps what we think of when we think of Jaime Hernandez's art as it has evolved since this time. It's much more scratchy. There's more like mid-tone lines, kind of more hatchy lines. And so it's interesting to see here how he's kind of playing around with finding his style in a way. I think that's some of the most interesting things about looking at the full scope of an artist's work, a true retrospective of that artist's work, to see how they've evolved and at what points they were still actively searching for some sort of style, and also just experimenting with different approaches. There's like a very understandable inconsistency to some of this earlier work. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that as far as early comic work is concerned for most of us, this is far advanced version of like early comic work. That's for sure. But naturally, a young artist is going to be trying to figure out how to do things on the fly while they're making their comic. And comics sort of forces you to have to draw everything, things that you might not otherwise think to draw or want to draw just on your own in your sketchbook or in an illustration. And so a younger artist is trying to figure out how to do those things on the fly, whereas a more seasoned artist has, for instance, maybe drawn bookshelves or buses in this case right here so many times that they have kind of like developed a shorthand for it. And with that, sometimes it's drawn with a certain level of confidence, and other times you can see that it's a little bit extra scratchy and maybe a little bit wonky because it might have been the first time he's drawing certain things, like the interior of a car, for instance, or the layout of a room. And personally, for me, I actually love seeing that stuff because we know that these artists that we're looking at become these really great artists who seemingly are confident at drawing anything, but to be able to see these little glimpses here where they were a little bit unsure of how to do certain things, and just by virtue of sticking with it and continuously pushing themselves to draw all kinds of environments and objects and things, they create their own shorthand, which is really just their own style. But just putting things into context, you could see here where his influences, Jaime Hernandez's influences, were really at this time, this is early 80s, this is signed 1982 up top over here. You can see where the skeleton of his work is all there. But the way he's rendering things, the line quality that he's using, it's very different and probably in a lot of ways speaks to what might have been influencing him at that time. There's almost like Robert Crumb-isms here going with the rendering of the jeans. I see that heavily, even some of the hair quality rendering, the background figures. This image right here feels, I guess for lack of a better word, like underground comics. And when you're a young artist and you're really inspired by a particular artist at that time, you're gonna obviously just put a lot of that inspiration, that current inspiration, into whatever it is that you're working on at that moment. And that to me feels like what this is here. This is a snapshot of really what he was looking at that moment in time as far as comics goes, and directly bringing that into his work, whether consciously or unconsciously. And it really translates well to black and white. You know, it still in this time period, these early Locus comics, they're very much at this point like fantasy, sci-fi inspired. There's certainly a little bit of like almost Frazetta inspiration here. You can see where he might be inspired by some of his contemporaries at the time, Dave Stevens of Rocketeer fame and Mark Schultz, who we've talked about a lot on this channel. A lot of that is showing through in these pages, and I would only assume that at that time, these alternative comic artists are kind of feeding off of each other and inspiring each other, because you see little elements of each other's work in all of their work. This is a really great panel right here. There's so much movement, and in a lot of ways it really kind of feels like a Mark Schultz comic. And in this time period when you're, I guess, trying to compete with other comics that might have been popular at the time, this is the early 80s, so if you're trying to stand out and compete with some more mainstream comics, this is the type of work that really like falls somewhere in between underground comics and what might have been, you know, being put out by Marvel and DC at the time. There's certain like mainstream superhero adventure comics elements to it, and then it veers off into something that is much more alternative. And in my opinion, it really kind of is like the best of both worlds. Over the course of time, I have actually read every story in this book. At one point, shortly after I first discovered Jaime Hernandez's work, this would be way back in college, I became very much invested in the Love and Rockets comics and caught myself up quite a bit. I was reading these long after they had first originally been published, but because these were made at the time by a very young man who was telling fictional stories, but they were fictional stories that were very obviously inspired by real life people and events. And so these stories at a younger age really spoke to me and appealed to me greatly. And although I have changed and evolved over the years, and maybe some of these stories don't speak to me in that same way, I can still appreciate the craftsmanship that has gone into these stories, not only through the drawing, but the visual storytelling. You never feel like color is missing in any of his comics, especially these earlier comics. It comes to life with just black and white because he's not afraid to use black and white to its fullest capabilities. And the depiction of nighttime here is so expertly done. Again, there's no color on here. There's no fancy lighting effects or anything. This is just the white of the paper and black ink. It's so descriptive and it puts you in the scene so well, I think, just by using the proper drop shadows and cast shadows. And again, not being afraid to blend black into black like this. And then it goes into this next page, which I think is just so expertly drawn in so many ways. Look at how the black is really like, that's the star of the show on this whole page. It's just framing all of these scenes. Just a panel like that is just an incredible illustration. I mean, even taken out of context of the story, these are just wonderful panels to just study compositionally. They're almost like film stills from a really great classic black and white movie. But then when put into the context of the story, you realize that the storytelling itself and the use of the black framing and the compositions of each panel moves the story in a way that is so fitting for the scene that he's trying to tell. Same amount of black. This is the next issue here. Same amount of black on this panel here, this whole opening page of, this is the beginning, I think, of the Death of Speedy series. And again, ratio-wise, it's probably the same amount of black that is on that previous nighttime scene, yet we know that this is daytime, whereas that other scene was nighttime. Yet he's still going black into black in many ways and choosing to completely silhouette all of those trees and really most of that car. But it's how he strategically uses the white and how he uses zero cast shadows like he would if it were a nighttime scene. And just the subtle use of a different balance of the black and white communicates that this is daytime instead of nighttime. I think he's just going with a certain kind of intuition that is very, very admirable and inspiring. There are plenty of people who can probably do a really great job at dissecting these stories from a narrative perspective. That's certainly not within my skill set. On my channel, I like to focus really on the art making process of all of this stuff and some of the behind the scenes, what goes into making this comic art and illustration stuff look the way it does. And I kind of like to nerd out on that stuff. I think some of you do as well. And so I'll just talk about what I know about Jaime's process. And even though so much of it is such a mystery as to how he makes these comics come to life on the page, seemingly, I have learned some stuff about his process over the years, some of which I've found very surprising. For one, when I first became familiar with his work and really started to get into it, I was under the impression that it was inked with a brush. I think I've heard others say that as well. It has a brushy, kind of like fluid inking feel to it. And so I was surprised to learn that he inks with a crowquill pen and rapidographs, I think, as well. But it's the way he draws his figures, the way he constructs them, the efficiency of line that he uses to describe a face, for instance. It has a kind of simplified, graphic, animated, almost cartoony feel to it, which makes it feel so alive. And I think it's easy to attribute that kind of a look to brush inking. Whereas crow quill inking, especially using a rapidograph pen, to me, I would equate that with something that's much more mechanical and stiff. And his art is the furthest thing from either one of those things. Also, in recent years, I caught like a live stream that he did. I don't think he live streams much at all. Perhaps this was the only time he ever did live stream. I think it was on Instagram Live. And he was just conversing with people, answering questions while he was working. And he was showing a set of pages that he was working on. And I was very surprised to see that he works in little bits and pieces. As I remember him describing the story that he was working on, he was drawing it and some panels were completely finished, some pages were completely finished, but some panels and some pages were completely rough and still in like layout form. And from what I remember him saying was that the story itself wasn't even finished. He was kind of figuring it out as he was drawing it. And the level of detail that he was putting into it was all the way from layout rough to completely finished. After you read one of his stories or one of his story arcs, it seems like it's so incredibly thought out and that the characters and their arcs are so premeditated before he even puts pen to paper. So I was shocked as to the fact that some of this stuff, if not much of it, is happening on the fly while he's actually just doing finished art. I think that's a real testament to the level of confidence that he has in his own process. As much of a great artist as he is, I think he's a really intuitive writer. From what I know, I don't think he has any formal training in writing or in art making as well. And I think that just speaks to the fact that formal training can only get you so far. But certainly it doesn't seem as though he goes about any of this stuff in a textbook kind of way. And I found that to be very, very interesting. And perhaps that speaks to these kind of intangible qualities that you can find in his work. The things that make his stories read so clearly, his art look so good that you can't really put your finger on. There's a really great book out there. I think it's called The Art of Jaime Hernandez. It's just a great collection of comics and his process stuff. I think it was in that book that I read that he also doesn't really use reference material when drawing his comics. So if he needs to draw an office waiting room or a car wash or a bicycle, he calls upon his own memory of those things and his cartooning abilities to simplify those things and just draws them from his head. I found that also to be fascinating as someone who uses reference very often to draw the things that I can't really draw from my head, which is most things. I find that to be fascinating that he chooses not to have that be a part of his process and rather rely on his memory of all of these things and then filter it through his ability to simplify and distill these objects down to their most simplest forms. And perhaps that also contributes to this real world that he's kind of creating on the paper, because it's coming from a world that really does exist in his head. It's not a world that you can find on Google. It's a very specific world. So it's certainly not photorealistic, but it's descriptive enough to be crystal clear as to what the backgrounds are, what the people are doing, the clothes they're wearing. But all of it is so consistent. It's so specific stylistically to the whole world that he's created. And maybe that is because of the fact that he's only relying on this version of the world that exists in his head. So if you are a Jaime Hernandez fan, a Love and Rockets fan, or if you're not really aware of his work and haven't read any of these Love and Rockets comics, but just really love good visual comic storytelling, amazing black and white comic art, this book is going to be for you, that's for sure. Especially just with how much volume is in this book. It covers so much, especially for the price too. It's an incredible bang for your buck. So if you like what you saw here and you're interested in picking up one of these books when it comes out, You can pre-order it now if you're watching this before it actually goes on sale. I'll put the link in my description of this video where you can pre-order this. This will be on sale March 10th. So if you're watching this anytime after March 10th, go pick it up. If you're not familiar with Jaime Hernandez's work and the work of Love and Rockets, and you want to pick this up either for yourself or as a gift, I would just keep in mind that these are stories and art that are meant for adults, even though at times it can look like it's inspired by Archie Comics styles, which it is, and it has a very kind of cartoony and animated look. These are certainly just meant for adults, so keep that in mind. Also, as I was mentioning earlier, it is Fantagraphics' 50th year anniversary, which is pretty incredible. And I was told that Fantagraphics is also going to be releasing a facsimile edition of Love and Rockets #1. That includes the first Maggie and Hopi story by Jaime Hernandez, as well as other stories by the Hernandez brothers. So again, if you're a Love and Rockets fan, keep an eye out for that. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments about anything you saw in this book, if you're a fan of Jaime Hernandez, if this is the first you're seeing perhaps of Jaime's work and the Love and Rockets comic work, leave that all in the comments below. I'd love to get a conversation around everything that we've talked about in this video. So anyway, if you like this video, please do hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. If you want to pick up a copy of this, whether pre-order or just buy it, I will leave a link in my description. Also in my description, I will leave links for my Patreon if you want to see stuff that I don't post here or anywhere else in terms of process stuff, comics, illustration. We're having a lot of fun over there. We're currently doing the 28 panels challenge, the February monthly comic making challenge. I'm sharing all my process and all my panels over on Patreon, and many of you are sharing it over there as well. So it's really cool to see, and we're having a good time doing that over there. So if you want to check out the Patreon, that link will be in my description. Also, I'm doing portfolio reviews. If you want me to look at your portfolio, offer any feedback and insight that I can give you that hopefully will make you a better comic artist, illustrator, whatever it is that you're hoping to achieve with your art. I'm offering whatever knowledge that I've accumulated over the years as a professional comic artist and illustrator myself. So if you're interested in having me review your portfolio, that link will also be in the description below. And yeah, other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video and this look at this new incredible Jaime Hernandez collection. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.